Okay, good afternoon. This is the cert-manager community meeting on 2nd of June 2021. And so far, there's only 4 of us here today from JetStack. We don't need to introduce each other.
5, I hope.
5 of us, yeah, I only see 4 people on screen. What are we discussing today? We're going to discuss a bunch of things around our planning for the 1.15 release. And towards the end of the meeting, we'll be joined by some members of the AWS team to discuss their progress on the PCA issuer, I think. So the first item on the agenda is one that I put in. So perhaps I'll start. Yeah, I just wanted to bring up that the fact that someone has created 2 issues regarding the his dissatisfaction with the default values in the certificate resource. In particular, this person recommends that we should set the private key rotation policy to be always by default, and that we should set the certificate revision history limit to be 1 by default. And those fields have both reasonably recently added to the certificate API, and they were given defaults which we chose the defaults in order to maintain backwards compatibility for people who had certificates created before those fields were introduced. And then the question is, how can we introduce better defaults without and at the same time maintain backwards compatibility? And there is a discussion in one of the issues between the person whose name I can't remember and James Munley, where James suggests introducing a new feature flag to the cert-manager controller, which would be the feature flag I think it might be called something like enable same defaults, and that will be introduced in a particular version of cert-manager, so that people who are dissatisfied with the defaults could enable that feature flag and get the behavior they want. And then it's sometime in the future that feature flag would become enabled by default, so that everyone would benefit from these improved defaults, whilst giving people whose certificates predate the key rotation, predate the revision history limit, time to adapt if they need to.
But then
that seems like a good idea, but anyone got any doubts about that?
yeah, I imagine that in the future, when we'll be again adding more fields like that, we'll have a question of whether we add those to the same defaults and potentially break people who historically enabled same defaults but don't know that there's a new field again. Or
yes, that's a good point. An alternative was the idea of a certificate presets resource, which would allow someone to specify the default values, certain default values, or certain fields of the certificate, which would be automatically added to new certificates when those resources are created. And that also seems like a useful idea, and that's kind of tangential to the same defaults, but it would be a mechanism for, it'd be a kind of a workaround for the current bad defaults. I don't think there's much more to say about it. I was kind of hoping if James Munnelly had been here, we might have picked his brains a bit on it, but since he's not, perhaps I'll move on to the next topic, unless there's any more remarks.
I feel like you only have two options. Like, you either change the defaults to what we think is going to be sane, or you never change them, because like hiding them behind a flag or whatever is effectively the same as never changing them, because people that don't read it will, like, people that would benefit from the most from sane defaults are people that never change anything. So yeah, if you just hide them behind a flag for backwards compatibility, people will still be using wrong, well, not wrong, but less sane defaults, and would get these. So this got kicked off from the support request where someone changed the key size of their certificate from 2048 to 4096, and then cert-manager couldn't issue new certificates for it because it wasn't allowed to rotate the private key from 2048 to 4096, right?
Yeah.
And so this is the kind of person that would have helped from sane defaults, and because they never changed it and didn't expect it.
Mm.
If anything, you'd have people that didn't want breaking changes could enable a flag to not change the defaults rather than the other way around. That's just my thinking.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree with that. I think I haven't got, I can't think straight at the moment, so maybe I'll take the minutes of this meeting. I'll go and try and flesh out the issues that I've linked to when we finish this meeting.
I'm getting a bit
yeah.
delirious in the heat as well. But I was gonna, I think I agree with the sentiment. I think I like the idea of having a flag which has the old defaults, because it's not the defaults themselves that's in question, right? I think we're all in agreement that the defaults aren't good. It's just the migration, right? Yeah.
Actually, going back, reading back on through the messages, the remarks on issue 3954, James also makes the point about, it's here, he says it, is it possible to make it so that when you read from the API server, when you read a custom resource from the API server, you get the current values, the insane defaults. But if you ever write back to the API server, it would, if they have not been set, it would set the new sane defaults at the same time. That's another thing that he talks about, but the question is whether it's even possible or advisable. So I'll try and look into that as well.
Why would you want to do that?
I think I might not be describing it very well. He says, I'll read it out loud. I think this could be resolved if we came up with a way to, one, default this field, the private key rotation field, on reads to be never, i.e. any existing resources will continue to have a value of never if the resource is read from etcd and does not have the field set. Number two, default this field on writes to be always.
Is that not just the exact same thing as changing the default anyway?
I would be surprised if changing the default value would have changed any existing resources, but maybe I'm misunderstanding something fundamental. because the resource has already been set to the default value, right? Like it already has that value. We're not proposing to go back and change that.
It might not. Again, I think I'm just not well enough informed. It might be set with a nil value, in which case it's stored. It depends whether we have a defaulting webhook for setting a default value, or whether it just keeps its nil value, which we then interpret in the controller and give and come up with some default inside the controller. I think that's sometimes the case, but not always.
So presumably that would be the case, given that James suggested that. Then I guess I would guess. I'm just guessing that he would know that. I certainly don't.
No, okay. I think I'll go. I need to look into it, and I'll talk to James perhaps at the next community meeting when I've got more facts. I'd better move on because we've got a number of other things to discuss. And thanks, Jake, for taking the minutes. Or is it Mail? Maybe both of you. Maybe all of you are. Thank you.
It's everyone.
So the next topic, the next thing we're planning that we might do for the 1.15 release is to introduce support for both the beta version of the Ingress resource and the final V1 version of that resource. And the question is, how do we support both those versions? And Urbe, you're going to talk about this, I think. So over to you.
Yeah. Should I share the screen actually, so it's possible to see that document, or there's not no particular value in doing that? I don't know.
Yeah, I'll share my screen. Sorry.
Watching this stuff. So I actually tried deploying Ingress with the V1 config with cert-manager Ingress stream just before the meeting, and like for me it seemed to be working. So I think it's not the case that Ingress stream does not work with V1 right now. I think that there's probably some conversion Kubernetes side. So when we query ingresses from Ingress stream, we get them no matter whether they were created with V1 or V1 beta 1. V1 beta 1 is the one we currently use in Ingress stream. I think the problem is that when they remove and they stop serving the V1 beta 1 in 122, then we will break because we'll be trying to access an API that's no longer served, if that makes sense. And our problem is that we want to support Kubernetes from 116 to 122 when 122 comes out, because there is a number of cloud providers that still support the old Ingress versions. And I looked back at some, like Marcia had done some work on this previously. She has this PR, I think 3411, where she started working on supporting 3 Ingress API versions concurrently, V1, V1 beta 1, and the extensions API. And she, I think from like briefly looking at this, she has done it by using a discovery client to discover which API version the server supports, and then having some conversion functions to convert the beta to V1 and then like parse that. And she closed this. It is the very last commit which has the actual functionality, I think. Sorry, no, is it that? I think, yeah, if you scroll down, then there should be the actual code. Yeah, so she does some conversion here, and there's like a discovery client somewhere. And she closed this issue saying that this is too ugly. And I understand from like another issue that was linked there that there were some discussions, and they decided that they will drop support to all Kubernetes versions and will only be supporting 4 at a time. And related to that, there also comes up issue of having like a LTS cert-manager release. So it seems like it kind of was decided that this is too ugly an approach, and we should just support 4 at a time. I guess that's not what we are going to do. And I think if we do support 2 concurrently, then probably it would make sense to pick up her work from this and just like adopt it, unless there's a better approach.
Is it usual that this, you conveniently have it highlighted, is it usual that this would involve using unsafe? That
Wait,
seems surprising to me.
Sure, we do that somewhere else.
wait, why do we need unsafe here? Oh, it's for...
This might be copied. I think maybe these functions are copied from the auto-generated conversion functions.
That seems to be the case. Yeah, there's.
And it does use the unsafe.
I think it does it to get around the types.
Yeah, they're identical, like stored underneath types, but they're not compatible. So you can just cheat and.
But that's not. Is that would that be safe long term? Because the V1 could add fields, right? I guess when she was
pointing directly to
together,
the
this
members.
works.
It's pointing directly to the struct members, and I think it will always work even if you add fields.
Yeah, fair.
Like we should like if we were to do this, I'm sure we should test it. Maybe that ties with the upgrade testing. I wonder how long we would keep doing it. Like when will we actually drop support for like 1.16, 1.17, 1.18? It's not meant to be a long-term solution, right? I guess it depends on cloud providers when they stop supporting.
Yeah.
It would be quite long term, I think, based on their support cycles, given AWS still support 1.16.
Is there a better way how we could do it? We could try to make the conversion better. We could test it, I guess, to catch case which Ashley mentioned.
Just talk me through it. We use in cert-manager 1.15. We'll be using a certain version of client Go, which is able to
1.5.
1.5, sorry, which is able to watch both the old ingress group and the new ingress group.
I think the problem is that we'll be requesting from the Kubernetes API server an API group version that it no longer serves. I think it would be the same issue that we will have when we are deprecating our alpha and beta versions and we are no longer serving them. Do I understand that correctly?
Right. So but you could you say a really ugly thing would be to sort of like if you copied all of the ingress shim code and had 2 versions of it, one for the V1 beta version of the API and one for the V1 API.
Yeah, well,
the ingress shim itself, I mean, that's a separate component anyway, so you could deploy both of them in parallel, and one of them would fail, one of them would work.
But is that the case? Right now, I think it's serving both, right? So I think the API server right now serves both, if I understand it correctly. So the ingress shims would need to communicate to understand which one.
Yeah. So like maybe they'd share a leader election or something like that. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. It's just thinking other ways to do it. Not very coherent. So the other thing is, you can use the discovery API. You can talk to the API, the Kubernetes API server, find out which versions, which groups and versions are supported, and then start the appropriate informers and watch, and I suppose start an appropriate controller. based on that.
And can you hear me?
Yeah.
And so one approach is to use the conversion magic, and the other approach is to use like 2 copies of the same English shim code. Is that correct?
They're not necessarily the only options. They're just two options that we've discussed so far.
And we can also drop support for Kubernetes 16, 17, and 18 in next release.
Yeah.
But we already decided not to, so I guess at least us. Am I correct or am I wrong? Or can we change our?
We could go back and make the argument again.
I actually added the reason why we support 1.16 in the supported page, so I'll have to remove that.
Feels a bit wrong to change our stance on an argument just when it doesn't suit us, you know.
Yeah, so I'd be in favour of that, Herbe, but I'd say we go back and make the case again, simplify everything. But
well, March
we can continue to release patch versions for 1.3, right? We can support people on those old versions of Kubernetes. In that way, they'll still be able to install cert-manager 1.3.
Yeah, I would be quite interested, like from that comment of March's in the PR that was in the issue that was linked, Kubernetes deprecation timeline. It suggests that there were already some discussions around it. Would have been quite interesting to hear what the argumentation was.
Yeah. Should we invite her back to the next meeting? See if we can persuade her to join us for old time's sake.
Need a principled open source person in the discussions, because my default response is support new versions and people can pay us to support old ones.
Yeah. Okay, well, should we draw a line under that discussion? We've got some ideas that we can explore after the meeting. And maybe one further thought is, what are other projects doing? How are other Kubernetes extensions supporting the old and the new versions of Ingress?
I just
we could collate a list of examples of other projects and their approaches.
Yeah, yesterday I discovered that Traffic is not supporting V1 either. And they don't have, I don't know, I couldn't find any useful issue, or apparently they added support for the latest version, but they didn't release it, so I couldn't test it.
There was Nginx.com ingress controller, like the commercial one. They just dropped support for it, and then they re-added it when they realized it broke cert-manager or something like that. I think there was some discussion a few months ago, but I can't remember.
Yeah, that rings a bell. So we could look into that.
But if I understand it correctly, at the moment, we do support the V1, at least with Ingress Nginx. It seems to be working like as much as I tried. Like there was an issue where someone said it didn't work for them, but I was not able to reproduce it, I think.
Well, doesn't it just work by virtue of the conversion mechanism?
Yeah, I think it should be working. I don't see any reason why it would not work right now. I think it will just break in 122. Should work now.
Entirely anecdotally, but on my K3S home cluster, I used V1 Ingress and it worked fine.
Yeah, so it should convert, because it, like right now, it will convert.
Wait, so this is a non-issue? Actually, we're already supporting V1 then.
We're
supporting it.
In 1.22, they won't any longer serve the beta version. So our requests to the API server will fail because we'll still be requesting V1, Beta 1 versions of ingress.
Oh, yes, yes.
That's the problem.
Yes. Ah, thanks for reminding me.
Okay, let's move on. Are you happy for us to move on, Abby?
Yeah, I think it's clear. The path forward's clear. We just need to investigate the two approaches and find some examples from other projects.
Cool. All right. Thank you. Welcome, Param, and welcome, James. Param, how long have you got? Can your item wait 15 minutes, or would you rather do your
absolutely.
section now? Okay, cool.
Yeah, I can wait.
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is Jake speaking about our plans for improved the ability to plug in HTTP 01 Acme solvers. Over to you, Jake.
Great, thanks. So this issue came up during the 1.4 development. We had a really comprehensive PR that added support for Istio virtual services. You're still sharing your screen, Rich. And this touched a lot of areas of the code base and made the CRDs a lot bigger. So in the end, we decided not to include that in the 1.4 release, and instead we should think about, rather than just supporting Istio virtual services, there are lots of different kind of service mesh or ingress or API gateway things that people use to route traffic from outside into their clusters. So we got some other feature requests like Glue virtual service, and the Kubernetes SIGs are also pushing Gateway API. So similar to how we treated DNS 01 solvers in the past, which was, okay, we've implemented in core cert-manager AWS Route 53 and Google Cloud DNS, but because there are so many DNS providers, we can't maintain all of these in the core cert-manager code base. So we're going to create a pluggable webhook that anyone can implement. That means that when cert-manager tries to solve a DNS challenge, it will just tell the external provider to create the records and then solve the challenge. So the idea is that we can extend that to also be compatible with HTTP challenges. This means that, yeah, rather than what happens right now is for every in-flight HTTP 01 challenge, cert-manager creates a solver pod, which is just a web server that serves only the response for that particular Acme challenge, and then creates or modifies an ingress, Kubernetes ingress object to just respond to that path. I think rather than that, so in the issue, the suggestion is that we modify the Acme solver in cert-manager to, rather than spawning one pod per challenge, we just have it be a controller that responds to all current in-flight challenges, and then have cert-manager call out to an external provider to say, we're going to be solving this challenge with this pod. Can you route to it however you would normally route into the cluster, like with a gateway API resource, or a Istio virtual service resource, or a Glue resource, or a traffic ingress resource, like anything. Hopefully that makes sense. And there is a skeleton design in the issue 3924, or a description of the problem rather. So what I've experimented with so far is changing the Acme Solver pod to a controller. And as of that, I had a couple of questions that I thought of. Like, firstly, if it's going to be a controller, should we just roll it into the current cert-manager controller pod that has all the other controllers, and then we'd get some advantage from sharing the Informer caches? Or should we have a long-running pod, or should we still spawn pods only when there are challenges in flight? Anyone have any thoughts?
I'm not sure. I had a question because I think when you mentioned this a little while ago, you said there was perhaps an alternative approach to basically do all solving like via one pod.
Yeah.
And having a service definition for it or something, and then just you can have basically a more of a static route approach. Do you think that's a viable option for us to consider, or do you think that's kind of a non-starter and we should be looking more at this extensibility thing?
So making the Acme Solver pod a like static pod where people. So right now you can specify the pod template for the Acme Solver. So someone tried to just add their own custom labels to it and then configured their, I think it was glue, to route anything that looks like an Acme challenge to that pod, or pods that match that label. But that falls down as soon as there are multiple challenges in flight, because cert-manager creates one pod per challenge in flight. And so due to Kubernetes semantics and then label routing, it would just end up on a random pod, and only one of N pods can solve that challenge. So yeah, I just changed it into controller to experiment, because it would solve their problem. But for instance, people thinking about the like ideal solution, people might not even want to run an Acme solver, because you can solve an Acme challenge at the edge just by responding with one string. So people might just want to write it into their AVI gateway config rather than running an extra pod. So like changing the Acme solver is a quick solution that would help people, but it's like it's not an ideal solution.
Right. And the like ideal solution feels very tractable.
What do you mean, sorry?
Like, I'm receptive to the argument that, that it's not the perfect solution, the ideal solution. But if the ideal solution involves us, spending 6 months re-architecting the cert-manager code base, then I'd rather go with the immediate solution kind of thing. So like, if we're not kind of wading into too much by trying to do this approach with the webhook kind of approach.
I don't think so, because we have to change. Basically, we have to change how the webhook is currently configured, because rather than it being a DNS webhook, it would be a challenge webhook, and you say, I want you to solve this challenge, and then something can pick that up, and then cert-manager could pick up its own challenge if you didn't want to use external, or I should write down what I think the flow should be, because I can't come up with it on the fly.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I don't think it changes the architecture of cert-manager. It really.
Yeah, I think it sounds like a reasonable approach for me. I think it seems like a good solution. And as you say, if it enables the ability to solve the challenge in the API gateway or the CDN or whatever, then that's quite neat.
So yeah, I guess the next step is convert the problem description in the issue into an actual design doc in the next 2 weeks, and
Yeah.
see and then yeah, we can iterate on it as a team in the next 2 weeks, and then see whether it's viable for 1.5.
Yeah, I think so. It seems like you've done some good investigation that would inform it, but I think we need it phrased as a design doc to be able to review it and evaluate it, right?
Yeah. However, I also think that changing the Acme solver as it stands to a controller is useful and
Mhm.
is a very, very short amount of work.
Okay.
I did an experiment in a day to change it,
Right.
and it doesn't, it's literally a drop-in replacement.
Okay. Should we land that in 1.4 then? Probably not.
Probably not, because it'll be after our self-imposed code freeze.
It's only small though. It's just a drop-in replacement. What could go wrong? Yeah, no, I think that sounds good. So yeah, I don't know if you want to consider those as kind of more separate things in the design, or if you want to do them both together. I think whatever
Yeah.
makes sense to you.
Thinking about it just briefly, I think they're separate. They're separate things, because one doesn't change the architecture of cert-manager at all, or any of the APIs. It's just a drop-in replacement
Mhm.
of the Acme solver pod.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jake. Any further remarks? And if not, we can move to the next item, which is, I think we've actually got 2 items left. One of them isn't on the agenda yet. Ashley, you are going to say something about pluggable secret backends in this meeting, or would you delay that until the next meeting?
If we're aiming to have something planned in the next 2 weeks, then it will need to be in this meeting.
Okay, let's do Param's report on the PCA issue, and then we'll go to Ashley's discussion of the pluggable secrets. Go ahead, Param.
Hi there. So I guess the key update was, so last time we talked about adding security contacts on the plugin so that if there are any security issues, we know whom to reach out to. So that has been merged. The second thing we talked about was the CI testing, and I think that's the current blocker on the final transfer step. So we are trying to figure out what account ID will be used. AWS account ID will be used for running these test cases, and I know Jake is working with the internal team to get us those AWS accounts. So right now that's what we are blocked on, and I guess I added a couple more items on the contributing guidelines, and I was wondering like if we can use the same contributing guidelines as cert-manager for this plugin. So we can probably point to the contributing guidelines on your side and just create contributing.md on our side, which will keep it up to date. I think this one is more around process.
I would have thought that those guidelines would be the same for all the projects in the cert-manager organization. That makes sense to me.
Okay, sounds good. So I'll probably submit later a pull request. I'll just copy the contributing guidelines that's there under cert-manager, and I'll still point a link for any updates. And I guess the last item quickly I had was updating the repo name. So I found that once the GitHub repo is transferred, the same name cannot be used. So we will have to use a different repo name for this plugin. So I'm hoping like in next 2 weeks, if we have the AWS account ID figured out and we have the Prow job running, we can hit the transfer button on our side. So I can work internally with our product manager just to figure out like what will be a good repo name as a suggestion. So I guess the key reason I'm bringing it up is whosoever accepts it on the cert manager side will have to provide the repo name, the updated repo name when the repo is accepted. So that's just a call out. Like, how do we want to do that?
It's
I think that's
surprising to hear
fine.
that. is it definitely the case? Have we never in Jetstack moved repos to different groups in GitHub?
We have, yeah.
Have we had to change the name in those cases?
No, I think if I understood correctly, it's not that we have to change the name, it's that it limits the name you can use afterwards, right? Like, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So actually, my understanding was that we have to change the name. And to be honest, I have never transferred a repo. I just heard it like offhand from another open source team. So I was wondering, because cert-manager might be doing the same thing once moving under CNCF. Like, do you have to change the repo name? Or
No,
I
you
see.
don't. So it changes in that, like, the canonical name would no longer be, you know, like when cert-manager moves, it will move from jetstack/cert-manager to cert-manager/cert-manager.
I see.
But it can, like, the cert-manager end part can remain the same as you transfer it, and we've done that before at Jetstack. That's not a problem.
Okay,
So
that sounds
it just
great.
moves it over. So if we want to keep AWS PCA issuer, then we can just keep that name. I don't know if it. The thing that triggers in my mind that maybe has an impact is that GitHub sets up a redirect. So if you went to the existing repo, AWS PCA repo, it would redirect you over to the new one. And maybe that means that you can't then reuse that name, like, on your side. Like, you can't then fork the repo back into your namespace. And that might be what's coming from. But I don't think there's any reason why we have to change the name when we transfer.
I see. That's fair. So I guess I'll just figure out internally on our side, like, do we need to change the name, or is everybody is good with this name because it has a AWS in it? So I just need to figure out from branding perspective. So probably I can open a GitHub issue to track it. And if we feel that there is a new name which is like a better proposal for this project, so we can update that GitHub issue. So whosoever accept that transfer on the cert-manager side can just make sure that the repo name matches with that.
Yep. I can't remember who the admins are. Are people in this group the admins of the cert-manager org?
It's most of us.
Yeah, I don't think I am. So yeah, you would be able to, if we do need to do something, then you'll be able to just coordinate with Jake or somebody. Like, we're sending the request now, you can jump on it and do it straight away and manage all of that. So yeah, that won't be an issue. But yeah, if you want to just confirm what name you would like to use, and then we can figure out if we can make that happen.
Okay, that sounds great. Yeah, I have been bugging Jake offline since last week to get the AWS account ID. So Jake, I'm really sorry, but
It's okay. I think we'll have it by tomorrow, because I think I just got a message saying that they're creating it right now.
Yeah, I saw a PR go past. So yeah, we should be able to do that.
That sounds great. So I guess once we have the account set up, Jake, we can work offline probably to have the Prow job set up. And we were talking offline as well. Like, is there a way for me to test the integration test right now using a test account on our side? Like, is there a way to trigger the Prow cluster from my local host by passing in some command or something?
Not that I know of, apart from, like, it listens to GitHub comments.
I see.
Yeah. But I assume, like, there'll be a make test or something, won't there? Like, that's already been done, I assume. But yeah, we'll have to iterate on the Prow config side, I think, once we have it all configured. Unless you want to set up a local Prow and and everything, but that's probably more effort than is needed.
Yeah. No, we do have.
You can. Did you say you're trying to run the integration tests?
Yeah, that's right. So when you make run tests, it actually runs the end-to-end integration test, which creates a CA, issues certificates with different templates, different key type via this plugin. So that those are the end-to-end integration tests that we want to run as part of CI system.
All I was going to say is Urbe pointed this out the other day to one of us, and you can download the Docker image that Prow runs all the tests in, and run that Docker image on your laptop, if that's appropriate. But it would help you know that the tests can run in that Docker environment, perhaps.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. So the reason I asked this question was, so our test cases are actually creating a temporary file to store CSRs and certificates that it gets back from PCA. So I was not sure like how the volume is mounted on Docker. Does it have write permissions as part of the test cases or not, or will it cause any issues? And if it does, we can figure out a different way or update the test infrastructure on our side. So that's the context behind like
Right.
why I wanted to run these ahead of time.
I'm not sure about the volumes. Maybe, yeah, I suppose the PROW might mount volumes at different mount points in that container, but I don't know.
I see.
But we can, for example, for each volume mount, for each specific volume mount, we actually, in the Pro job config, we can specify if it's like read-only or not.
Okay, that's great. I think that would solve our issue then. Yeah.
Maybe like, maybe if you look at, for example, like any of the files in the testing repo that you raised the PR against, like you can see how the volumes are mounted. And also, if you look at those images, they are the actual images inside which the tests run. And if you'd like to, they are publicly accessible, so you can pull down and see if it runs.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Param, for that update. Hopefully next time we meet, we will be a step closer to having the project in the organization and properly tested.
Sounds great.
So there is, one more item from Ashley. Ashley, you're going to talk about or discuss the plan for us supporting in some form or other pluggable secrets. Over to you.
Yeah, I don't have anything like super formal prepared or anything for this. I've spent a lot of time reading various documents and what have you, but I've not got anything formal written down. James did have this document, which isn't public at the moment, but you should be able to open it, Richard.
Is that in the Google Meet chat? Let me find it.
Yeah, it is, sorry.
Got it.
I think I can just make it public now. I don't see why not. It's
Sure.
all public info. So
that'd be good to add to the meeting notes.
So I should change it to anyone on the internet with this link can comment.
Sounds reasonable.
You should be able to share the link now and everyone should have access.
Cool. So yeah, this document kind of covers a lot of it. That's the link if it's any different. It is not any different. So I think the headline of from when I've been looking at this, and it's alluded to in the comment sort of stream that James and I have on the second page, it seems to me like the way to approach this is to define a pluggable interface for cert-manager to write secrets. So currently under constraints, we have under must allow for a mechanism to allow for private keys to be used within the cluster. I think my proposal would be that we don't try and solve that at all. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there. I linked to the Secret Store CSI stuff. There's loads. The CSI generally enables a lot of this.
Yeah, I think like it's key. Like if nothing can read the secrets that we write, then the secrets are useless, right? But it doesn't have to be the cert manager providing that. Like if there's a whole bunch of things out there, then that's great. We can just point to those solutions to do that. That's fine. But there has to be a way to do it, and it can't just be like cert manager just exposes an interface where anyone in the cluster can read any secret or something like that. It's just a terrible way of solving the problem. So we shouldn't do that.
So yeah, I'm proposing that we lean on the existing things. There's vault sidecars, there's all kinds of stuff for reading secrets.
Yeah,
and that the interface that we provide is essentially a way to configure where the secret gets written. Mm-hmm. So at the moment, the way that works is, say on your cert manager certificate resource, you have a secret name. and you just write in the name and it writes to the secret. It's not particularly complicated. That already is worth changing to me because it doesn't let you specify a secret in a different namespace. That is super confusing. I got bitten by it hard when I was setting up my home K3s cluster. Like it's not a particularly friendly experience to use it that way. I think other people will have bumped on that. So we solved that problem. Go on.
I think that is deliberate.
Yes, it is.
It's deliberate because you don't want people to be able to create a certificate in one namespace, which cert-manager then reveals the secret of some other user in a different namespace. That's all I was going to say.
Okay, so if that's the case, we should add that to the documentation because I bumped on it hard and there was nothing suggesting why that would be the case. So then we don't solve that particular pain point for when you're first starting out, but we essentially replace the secret name with a new sort of backend field on the resource, which would contain the details of how we end up writing the cert to whatever backend someone wants to use, which could include Kubernetes secrets. So it would be a full replacement. Obviously, we would still have to support secret name in the interest of backwards compatibility, and we wouldn't, I suspect, allow people to specify both a backend and a secret name. That's an implementation detail.
Yeah, and I think we just want to keep the existing behavior as the obvious, straightforward solution, because that's what 90% of people are going to want to do, I suspect. Like, I think we're adding like an advanced feature rather than forcing everyone to figure out which secret backend they want to use or whatever. Like, most people don't care about this.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, there's not much. I've not written down like what that would look like. I think it's reasonably self-explanatory when I say it. If that's not the case, please shout. But I pretty much it's just a blob of YAML that has the back end. Same way you would configure an issuer. You specify the key, specifies the type of backend. I guess there'll be a reference to a secret to allow us to write to, say, Vault or whatever, and the path on which we would do it for Vault. Same for CyberArk or any other given backend. And then this becomes just like DNS solvers, where we have potentially have one external repo with all of this in, but that external repo just has a subfolder for each type of pluggable backend. So we don't have 50 repos for 50 backends. We have one repo with one sort of makefile at the root, and you just run make Vault backend, and it will create that. And you pick and choose which ones you might want for your given cluster. So that makes it quite easy to have a central place where you can view them all, but we're certainly not maintaining them upstream in the main cert-manager repo. But we still have sort of visibility on it.
Yeah. So
sorry.
Go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say, how would these backends be configured? Like I guess if we were to do this, it would need to be a new resource, I guess.
Not well. I mean, sure, potentially, yeah. I in my head, I had. Let's see if I can type something out.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question.
Where are you typing, Ashley?
Into Google Meet. You'll see it shortly.
Oh, right, okay.
The best code snippet sharing platform on the planet, the Google Meet comments.
It appears to be struggling to actually send the message. My code's just so good, it's just
Have you found some sort of RCE exploit in Google Meet? You just type code into the chat and it executes it.
That has failed. It refuses to show stuff that's been typed on a blue keyboard over Google Meet.
It's my punishment. Okay, I'll put it onto the third page of the document that we were sharing.
The reason why I say that is that certificates, I don't think they should be referencing secrets or credentials. That makes sense. Like certificates, like ideally should be a resource for like a consumer, if that makes sense, like a client.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, that's
so. But the so we get into the kind of trickiness of issuers again. Like if the backend was a new resource, how do we properly gate which backends clients can reference or not? Like we could have cluster scope backends or namespace backends. We've also kind of already run as the issue if that doesn't really work, and that's why we have the approval API. So like, how do we approve that a client is able to reference a backend? Maybe we could do that with RBAC. I'm talking out loud here, but
I mean that's exactly what we're having the conversation, is to talk out loud, right?
Yeah. So
I think that's a really good point. I think, thinking about what these users might want to do, like it might be more of like a global setting kind of thing, right? Where you just like, things aren't in secrets, they're just stored over here and everything goes over there. I think that raises a very key point, which should probably be written in that document, is like, must not allow you to hijack somebody else's secret by like choosing the same name in like a different namespaced environment, right? Like if it's just like the path within Vault and you're just like, yeah, I want to use the path that I know this other certificate's using, and now I've just hijacked the private key of it. Like that's obviously a key constraint that we have on this that I hadn't realized before. So yeah, a really good point. I think another like hidden wrinkle within this, which has come out of this discussion, like I think it's a good argument you've made, Ashley, for like why we should care about writing them. And I think like the side of that is like, do we really is it like actually a write-only interface, or do we need to ever read the private key for cert-manager's normal operation? And I think the only reason we need to read it, correct me if I'm wrong, is to generate a CSR. But I think what that's pointing to is that perhaps this shouldn't be like a secret, like write interface, not like, here's a secret, I want you to store it, but I want to have a private key, please. And now please give me the CSR that corresponds to it. More like the isolated issuer use case, right? Like more like how that works. Because for certain backends aren't going to be able to work as in like, here's a private key, please store it. So for instance, a HSM, if you were to try and plug this in, is not going to be, please store this private key, now please give it me back so I can, generate the CSR in order to complete the certificate request. It's going to be more like, please create a key using of this size or whatever. Now please generate a CSR that I can get signed for you. And that's perhaps important for us to build into the interface.
Yeah, that's so. Specifically thinking of an HSM, I would expect that a write-only API would be exactly what we would want there. So that's what I sort of thought initially. I'm sorry, there's someone at my door. It's my sister, so I'm just gonna try and I'm flag her and tell her to go away. She'll get the message. So. Yeah, so with an HSM, the whole point, right, is that you can't retrieve the private key afterwards. Like that's you might ask it to generate a key for you, and then you can use it to sign a CSR. You might ask it to sign your CSR later.
Yeah.
So I guess it's the methods that you want to be able to use the HSM are sign and write, potentially write. But actually developing a list of those verbs is probably useful.
Yeah. I think it's worth considering that maybe I think that HSMs aren't appropriate for the certificate resource at all. I think like One thing to consider is certificates are nothing more than what's the word I'm looking for? An opinionated implementation over certificate requests. And it would be wrong, I think, to try and shoehorn in functionality which just isn't appropriate for the certificate resource. I think it would be fine, and users making use of a HSM would probably think it'd be fine to use a separate resource over certificates. And there's nothing stopping us writing more God, it's hot. Opinionated implementations over certificate requests.
Right.
Having an HSM certificate, I think, would be another totally valid thing to do.
I think that's worthy of more discussion. I think it's clear that we should try and figure out, as you say, what that list of verbs are for, pick 3 to 5 things that we might want to have backends for, like a HSM, like Vault, a couple of other things, and figure out how they work and what would work for them. Because if we build an interface that can't be used with certain backends, then might not be the interface that we want. So figuring that out seems like a good thing to do, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
This was an idea that the actual TLS cert also goes into that backend, because we do read that from there to figure out whether we need to renew or not.
Right.
That also kind of nicely segues into another point on this, which is that I generally think it's better if we can store the entire thing in the backend and not just the private key. I think that would be a valuable thing to explicitly write in the document, because otherwise you end up in this horrible world where you successfully write the private key but fail to write the cert, but fail to read the cert from somewhere else. So there was a discussion in the JetStack Slack earlier about potentially having Kubernetes secrets that mirror your backend, except that the secret wouldn't contain the private key. I think that's the attempts to do that would be super tricky, and you just end up with race conditions and the distributed systems problems that don't seem worth the benefit there. But, I guess try and maintain a single source of truth and have that everything be in the back end.
Yeah, but if somebody wanted to, similar to the CSI thing, right? If somebody wanted to have an implementation that synced over the certs, but not the private keys into Kubernetes for some use, then they can do that. But we're not trying to maintain both sources in parallel, if that makes sense. I think that's legitimate. cert-manager just writes everything to the back end, and then it's up to the user what they do with it. They asked us to put it in the back end. It's in the back end. They can do what they want with it.
Of course, we do also retrieve the private key from secret in one of the certificate control loops, because we check whether we do some check to also see if it matches the spec or something like that. So we do access that key.
Right. So we might. Okay, that's good to know. So it sounds like we might not be able to do that check, or that might be another verb that we need.
I have a feeling we only need the public exponent, though. Is my feeling.
Okay.
Because I imagine it's just checking key sizes and stuff, and checking the signatures.
Right. It does the function that Urbe linked explicitly decodes the private key.
But maybe we don't need to.
But even if we had the public exponent of it, we can still do the same operations, I think.
We check the algorithm there, basically.
Right.
Yeah, you get into this kind of thing where it's who do you trust? And if we generated the cert in the first place, if we generated the private key, then users should be able to trust that we can access the key. But equally, they might not want us to ever touch the secret after it's been written. It's certainly the private part of the secret. But I guess that's kind of a separate thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think we're okay with some limitations. Like, if you don't want the private key within your cluster, then we can't do the thing that requires us to look at the private key within the cluster. Like that's what you're asking us to do. So you're giving up, cert-manager checking that the key matches your spec of what's there. And maybe this is towards what Josh was saying about certificate not being the right abstraction for what we're dealing with here. But yeah, so it sounds to me like we have a reasonable idea of what we're going for, but we have some questions about how it might work in practice, and we need some investigation and some design work, right? Is that what everyone else thinks?
That sounds right to me.
I think I would really like some. I think you're going to do it anyway, but some concrete user stories explaining how this feature would be used. Like, so if I've got a pluggable, if I'm storing my secrets in Vault, I need to store the credentials for Vault in a secret in the cluster. So I have to trust the secrets mechanism that far, secured by RBAC. But those credentials allow someone who can break that mechanism to get to Vault and get the private key.
Not necessarily, because you can do machine identity on clouds, where you can say that only this machine can access this role in Vault, or only this server's account. Like if you're using GKE workload identities.
It still uses the I assume it doesn't do further attestation like IPs and things like that. It's the service account tokens are still stored in secrets. So
it's secrets all the way down.
Yeah.
But I think the reason I said it is, so we say that there are these people who, what do we say, who rely on an existing secret management system that they have, such as CyberArk or Vault. Well, does that mean that they want every credential in those systems? They don't want any credential in a Kubernetes secret.
Yeah, but they can't have they have a bootstrap problem, don't they? So, but it gives them. I don't know. I'm not one of those.
Does cert-manager need to mount? Does it need to have? I don't know. Dynamically mount this. We said about. Ashley said about being able to write the secret, and then there'll be some other mechanism for a web server to mount that secret, which might be provided by a Vault sidecar.
Mm-hmm.
Well, would these same customers expect that cert-manager access the credentials for the Vault by that same mechanism somehow?
Possibly,
which sounds difficult.
Expands the problem statement quite a bit if we're expected to do that.
So that would be it'd be nice to go find an example of one of these customers, shouldn't say customers, users who want this, and just make sure that they will be satisfied that just the cert-manager managed private keys should be stored in.
Yeah.
As an enterprise user who pays a lot of money for CyberArk, I want to store my secrets in CyberArk.
Yeah, I think that's part of the point of this process, is to help us clarify what questions we have, right, and what the crucial parts of this are, and what maybe is missing in the first easy description of the problem, moving beyond that first easy description to the more tricky description, and clarifying these things. And we can go back and talk to some of these users when we have access to them, and try and clarify some of these things if we narrow down to a list of questions. Are they happy with this? Does this, if maybe putting a design in front of them, like an architectural diagram, we're going to do this, and this is going to talk to this, and then that's going to happen over here, and this key is going to move over there, and this is going to happen over there. Would you be happy with this arrangement? That's a useful sanity check for these.
So, as a next step, I've certainly gained a lot from this discussion. Should I put together a super rough design document of how this could possibly look based on what we've just said, and we can go from that. Do we
Yeah,
need to
I
discuss
think-
this further?
I think if you want to just update that first doc based on a couple of things that might have come out of the discussion, like clarifying or adding some constraints or whatever, risks, whatever. Yeah, and then putting together a design, and you'll likely find some issues of your own, and then you'll share it, and we'll find some more issues, and we can figure out if we need to go back and ask some more questions, or if we can design our way around those issues and come up with something that we think is going to work, and then get feedback on it and go from there. Does that sound all right?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, thanks, Ashley. I can see Mail busily adding another item to the agenda. Is everyone happy to stick around for a bit longer, or shall we? Well, stick around if you like, disappear if you like. It's up to you. I'm happy to stick around because it's he and I have been discussing that this afternoon, discussing this problem this afternoon. Mail, tell us about this observed generation.
Thanks, Bram.
Item.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Bram.
Have a good.
So I'll share a link to the private discussion. It's not available. It's a private repo, so that's why I don't put the link in the doc. But the problem that we faced, we called it ping pong. It's simple, but like we added an observe generation field to the issuer and certificate objects. And now that we do this, anyone who is reconciling with an old cert-manager client, so like using the Go package prior to 1.3.10, whenever they are going to reconcile using the put operation, HTTP operation, it is going to override the observed generation to the 0 value. And that's why I say that we should never add observed generation to certificate requests. That's
Is
everything
that-
I wanted to say.
Is that because it doesn't do a get, modify, and then put? Like, why
No,
does it
so
reset to 0?
because it doesn't exist, this JSON field doesn't exist on the cert-manager client prior to 1.3.0, which means imagine that we have an external issuer that relies on the cert-manager package 1.2.1. When they receive so they will receive an observed generation with a 1, like there will be an integer there, but when they receive it, when they update it, because they don't know about this field, they're just going to drop it.
It unmarshals
so really,
it unmarshals it unmarshals the JSON content into a struct that doesn't have that field, so it's just discarded. And so when you send that back to the API server, it's sent back with a 0 value.
Yeah. So it's sorry. Go ahead.
This was I'm not convinced it's a problem for certificate requests, but it's a problem for the thing we're working on, where we've written a controller which updates an issuer resource, and cert-manager also updates the status of the issuer resource. Certificate requests, I don't think, if it's a certificate request assigned to an external issuer, then cert-manager never updates the status of that certificate request, I don't think.
We also don't put observed generation for certificate requests, and we never would, because the generation would never be not 1, because the spec never changes once it's been created.
Ah, yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so we're saved. Never mind then. So yeah, it's just a stupid thing, but when we did this change, I didn't think about that. Like,
if there were hypothetical other controllers or other cert-manager extensions which used the certificate resource or the issuer or cluster issuer resource, they would all suffer from this problem potentially.
And it would be for us to either find a mechanism for like detecting this, or do the same as Josh has been doing with other external issuers and opening PRs and doing this.
And the issue itself is it's a UX one. It's not a functionality one. It just reports the wrong observed generation rather than having
No, it actually breaks. If you have two
triggers, both controllers keep triggering each other because we.
Right.
It's because one keeps adding the observed generation, the other one just keeps blanking it.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's silly.
It's pretty bad.
I understand now. Yeah. Yeah, that's not good. I wonder if we can fix that somehow internally. Whether we can have a webhook that would enforce an observed generation rather than the client setting one, or at least setting one if the client didn't set one. If that makes sense. Like it should be totally valid for a client to set an observed generation that isn't the latest, because it may well be that the reconcile loop of the client is behind on the generations, and that should be reflected in the state. But if the client sets like a null observed generation, the webhook should, or maybe it shouldn't, because then the webhook might be reporting like a false sense of security, I guess. Yeah, it's not a really good way of getting around that.
I think some people would argue for server-side apply, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Actually,
patching.
that would be a better idea.
And use the unstructured client rather than a cert-manager client. Maybe. I don't know. I was experimenting with.
If you use an unstructured client, then you would write back despite you not knowing about the observed generation, you'd write it back. But
yeah,
I know unstructured isn't very popular, so I'm not sure we're going to rewrite everything on unstructured.
Is there anyone using an unstructured client?
The control plane team uses it.
I just started it I'm using it for the CAS end-to-end tests because I didn't want to create a CAS client set when it's like I can't be bothered. I'm just going to send the fields that I know exist.
Oh, okay.
So I've unintentionally avoided any problem of this kind in future.
Yeah. Jetstack Secure uses it because it's collecting resources without knowing what API versions are supported and things like that. It just wants to grab the resource and it doesn't care too much. So there are some use cases for it, but I'm not sure people would recommend using it for all interactions with the K8s API.
So that's everything I wanted to share.
Cool.
It was an interesting debugging session to find this.
Need some food, so I'm going to go.
Excellent.
Josh, will you stop the recording?
Yeah.
Can I do that?
I think anyone can do it.